Hey, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies while we enjoy our cup of coffee. Before we get started, I want to invite you to hit the share icon or the share button, or if you know somebody that would gain some benefit from the topic today, which we're going to be talking about the feeling of overwhelm. You know somebody that you've had a conversation with recently. You said, hey, they might get some value out of this. Go ahead and share this episode with them and make sure that they get access to it. It's available on video form on YouTube and Facebook, and it's also available on all the popular podcast networks. You can find more information there at Loc-Doc.net/podcast, or just share this episode wherever you're listening or watching to it, and it will maybe create some benefit for somebody else. We always obviously invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. We have a brand new episode every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., and we want you to get the latest information and not to miss out on a single episode, so make sure you hit the subscribe button today. Today's guest is Katie Stoddart. I believe I said that correctly. Hopefully I didn't mess it up. She comes to us all the way from Sweden, and we're excited to be able to make these connections. Jeff Niswich connected us together, who was a previous podcast guest, and bringing those international folks here is always a blast. So we're going to jump into that conversation. She's going to be talking about the feeling of overwhelm and how to deal with it, some actionable things, the importance of taking breaks and managing that information. That's going to be the topic, the direction that we're headed. So I invite you to grab a cup of coffee and grab a notebook and get ready for this conversation.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
Well, welcome, Katie. Thank you for being here and being part of the podcast today and being another international guest. That is always cool for us, because when we get to connect with people across the country in the United States, it's cool. But then when we go global, then it's really, really cool. So where are you coming to us from?
I'm based in Gothenburg, Sweden. And thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's very cool. Jeff Niswich, who was a guest on our podcast, we can link that below, a while back, connected us and said that you would be a great guest. And I've been doing some research on you, and I'm excited to kind of jump into the conversation. It's going to be great, and kind of learn more about you. But before we do that, we do have to jump into rapid fire, 5 randomly selected questions just to get under your skin with unknown point values. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Number 1, what is the most amazing fact that you know?
Oh my God. I'm like all ready for something about myself. This is the most amazing fact, full stop. Oh yeah, they're supposed to be rapid, right? I'm going through like all the facts I know, thinking, well, that's not that amazing. I'm thinking of first sentences of books like L.P. Hartley, the past is a foreign place. People do things differently there. But I'm like, that's not a fact. That's a first sentence. I'm thinking of statistics too. Can't think of any. I'm just going to go with lots of first sentences of book. The clock is striking 13. There we go. For your audience, they have to figure out that's the first sentence of which book.
The clock is striking 13. All right. Very cool. Okay. And that's the challenge for everybody listening to go figure out which book that's from. Okay. Let's see here. Number 2, what do you wish someone would have taught you a long time ago?
So many things, but the first one that comes to mind is managing my emotions.
Ooh. Come on now. Give me a little bit more of this. So you wish somebody would have taught you how to manage your emotions. Why is this?
Because I feel that, especially growing up, whether it's as a child or as a teenager, we're just not taught what our emotions are, how to manage them, how to deal with other people's emotions. And once you really start to study this and, for example, feel physiologically in your body, in your throat, in your stomach, in your lungs, the different types of emotions, it's astounding the type of progress you can make, whether it's in a negotiation context or in a relationship with your partner or managing a client deal. All these things are hugely improved when you know how to manage your emotions.
Very interesting. I like to just tell people to calm down. Just stay calm. It always
That's
seems,
telling them, but being able to calm yourself down is useful too.
it always seems to work well, right? Okay, let's see here. What is the best event that you've ever attended?
This is going to sound like a classic, but I'd say UPW, Tony Robbins.
Okay. I was looking on your website, and you mentioned Tony Robbins, you mentioned James Clear, and a couple other influences, which we just read recently in our organization, the book Atomic Habits. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is going to be cool. All right, question number 4. What pets did you have growing up?
Fish.
Fish. What kind of fish?
Goldfish.
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 All right. And then last question here. Number 5. What culture would you like to learn more about?
India.
India. Why is that?
Because I really enjoyed the meditation, yoga, Indian food, but also I think they have a very opposite culture to Sweden, where I'm currently living. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to know a little bit more how they manage the population, how their traditions are. And I've heard it's very colorful. I've never been. And yes, I just think very, very different culturally. And I'd be very curious about their mindset, but also how they manage things in practice.
Very cool. All right. Well, you passed rapid fire, five randomly selected questions, and we'll give you a score of 869. So congratulations. You did well.
How is the score calculated?
It's totally made up on the spot. There's no formula besides it, whatever number pops into my head. So very cool. Thank you very much again for being here and participating. So kind of jumping into the conversation, and one of the main things we're going to be talking about today is reducing overwhelm. And, I feel like that's a thing that a lot of people are struggling with right now. Demands are high from our customers. Demands are high across the board. Finding folks to join your organization is hard. Just a lot of things are changing in the world right now. It has over the past 15, 16 months. A pandemic has hit and everything is happening, and now you're just processing all this stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into the meat of that, from a perspective, I want to understand, so you're a coach. You help people kind of navigate through these things. Looking on your website, which is the Focus B, right? You've got a lot of good information on there, some great blog posts. So let's start in here. How did the Focus Bee come to be?
I think it's because I feel that focus is such a fundamental asset to both managing our business, but our lives. Mm-hmm. And this includes everyday focus, which I call short-term focus, and also that long-term focus and perspective, which I call long-term focus. And I'm writing a whole book with this short-term focus, long-term focus, and also selective focus, which is about how we manage our emotions and thoughts and focus on specific things. Anyway, it's very in-depth in my book. The point being, I loved focus. And then also I felt that people are always busy bees, and I want them instead to be present and productive and high-performing and not just busy. So sort of opposite of busy bee, focus bee. Very
cool. Okay, so how did you get into this realm, though? To helping people understand that, to diving into that, and helping people to kind of be the best that they can. Where did that come from? How long have you been doing that?
So I've been a coach for 3 years. I've had my own coaching practice for 3 years. Before this, I used to work at sea as a hydrographer, a marine engineer. And I was processing and analyzing data, but I also managed teams at sea. And I realized that I really love the leadership aspect, the people aspect, the communication, a lot more than the data processing. And one thing led to another. It's a long story, but shortcut is I discovered coaching, fell head over heels in love with coaching, and quit my engineering job to start my own business.
So it's a very interesting shift, right? Engineering to coaching. But I would imagine, so you start thinking about different coaches, different motivational folks, people that have helped, individuals achieve something great. there's some inspiration behind it. There's some just pure on adrenaline. But I guess at the heart of it, there is a lot of strategy and a lot of analyzing and understanding a clean structure that you can apply. So when you first say, I shifted from engineering to coaching, that seems to be a really big stretch, but it's not. So how much are you taking that kind of analytical approach to the coaching side?
A lot. And this is exactly the point I try and explain to people is, yes, it's different in many respects, but the analytical side, the methodological side, the fact that, I follow a framework and tracking progress and business performance, all these things really benefit from an engineering background. So I found it tremendously useful.
Framework you start looking at books like Traction and Clockwork, and there's a new book out by Donald Miller called Business Made Simple, and there's a ton of them out there that are frameworks for operating your business. When it comes to coaching and developing a framework, and really a lot of times, and I think this is going to be a lot of when we're talking about from feeling overwhelmed, it's because we don't have a framework to process things. So when you start to actually sit down with people and they start to unpack that feeling, it's because you feel chaos because you don't have a way to process the information. So you're helping people to take a more analytical approach to problem solving versus just the emotion side of it.
That's one way of putting it, though the emotional side is also important. I think it's balancing both aspects, both looking at from a structural perspective and also having a bit of that logical detachment and overview, but then also really tapping into the emotions. Fear comes up all the time, for instance. So you can't just ignore that sort of emotion.
What is so you're dealing with different clients, I'm sure in different business types, different leadership models, whatever. What is some common characteristics that you're finding with people that either have an idea and they're trying to take it to the next level, or maybe they've hit a ceiling? Like, what is that kind of common characteristic that you go, okay, this is the problem that is common across, and now we're going to start to work through attacking that?
That is such a fantastic question, and it's actually super interesting to see the things that come up. I remember one specific week where each client, literally in different contexts, came up with an issue around control. So it was all about control. The things they can't control, they worried about, the future, the fact that they were doing well now, but what if the future they didn't control? Everything seemed to be around control. That's one thing that comes up quite often. Another is they all tend to be either hyperachiever or perfectionists. And this means having extremely high standards. Fantastic. However, this also means that they never feel it's enough, that they're often frustrated, that they might spend too long on things, that they don't have boundaries. So working on what does good enough look like, and when can they feel at peace and maybe take the weekend off or the evening off and not do 20 more over hours to compensate for this. So this is also extremely common, hyperachiever and perfectionism.
So basically developing, and I'm not trying to simplify the concept, but because you hit on some really interesting theories there, or I guess really interesting practices. At the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to discipline, because when you're dealing with high performers, overachievers, right, it's I want to go out and get everything, or I can't, you can't basically stop, because if you stop, what's going to happen? And it's understanding the discipline factor of creating and following a framework, following a process. It is. I appreciate your answer there, because when you start to talk with people in that aspect, in a leadership standpoint, maybe entrepreneurial types, they're always trying to accomplish something. And it's almost to their own detriment, right? Because they can't get out of their own way without a good set of disciplines. And it's like the most talented, you hear the example a lot of times on coaching, but the most talented athlete is going to be a great athlete just because they're naturally gifted that way. But if they don't have a good coach to help them lay down discipline and follow those processes, then they're just going to be a has-been, right? So it comes down to coaching and pointing out those kind of areas that they need to clean up. So how, in your coaching career, as you've been doing that, how have you been, what is that kind of process? You sit down with a client and say, okay, let's kind of lay it all out, and then you help them kind of stay on track with the framework that you're developing?
Yes, just one point to come back to what you were saying about discipline. It's also about having the discipline to take the time off. So a lot of the time, because they're hyperachievers and perfectionists, it's a bit about the discipline of following through a framework and a process, maybe just focusing on a few things. But a lot of the time, it's about having the discipline to actually take time off, to not feel guilty if they take the odd Friday afternoon off. So it's also a lot about the discipline and the boundaries of switching off. So that's interesting, because people think discipline means work, but it's actually being disciplined about breaks is really hard for overachievers, hyperachievers, and really benefits their business. Because especially if there's any form of creativity, which for all business owners there is, not taking any breaks or any time out really reduces the creativity. So yes, I just wanted to add this to the discipline part.
We'll come back to that in a little while, because hopefully my wife is not paying attention to this part of the podcast, but I do want to come back to that, because that's something I think that a lot of folks probably struggle with. Not me particularly, I'm just saying some other folks may.
Sounds good. I've forgotten your question now. So you were asking me, how I go through this with my clients. So generally, I do have a whole process. I do have a whole framework. Depending on the client, we will establish at the beginning what they want out of the relationship. So this could be reducing overwhelm. This could be having more free time. This could be reaching their business goals. This could also just be having high levels of energy.
Yeah.
That sets the outcome for the coaching for the 4 months together. And then, depending on what they prefer, we can either go through the whole framework, or we will focus on one specific element. For instance, if someone is really struggling with overwhelm or lacking energy, we might really just focus on the productivity side of things. But I also have clients that are good with that, but maybe they just want to keep track of their business goals or keep more focus and not be diluted. And then we'll really tap into this. So I have two alternatives. Either I'll go through it all, or I will go into one specific element and dive, do the whole 4 months on that specific element.
We understand the frustrations HOA board members and property managers face when deciding the best solution for their HOA and pool security. Should we use a keypad, hand out keys, or install a key card system? Do we even need cameras? These are some of the questions that are difficult to navigate, and we're here to help. At Loc-Doc Security, we've spent over 20 years working with homeowners associations and property managers to find the system that best fits the pool and HOA needs. Camera systems for the front gate or front entrance, key card systems for the pool gates, or simply updating the gate so that it meets safety and code compliance. We like to take the guesswork out of the process to answer any questions and help find the right solution. Our mission is to help you protect your people and your property, and that includes pools. Contact our team today to schedule your free consultation for your community. Simple question before we're going to jump into this overwhelm next. Why is it important for business leaders or leaders at any level to have an outside coach? Like, why do you see that as a big important step or a value add, rather than, hey, I've been running this business, why do I need somebody to help coach me? I've figured it out to this point. Why do I need somebody to help me?
One of the most important aspects of leadership is introspection, and there's two key ways to do introspection. One of them is on your own, either in nature or journaling or meditating or reflecting on the past week. And another one is with someone from an external perspective. Now, both are hugely beneficial, and I promote both. And when I coach leaders, I also encourage them to, have a meditation practice or journal, and also take time to reflect. And the reason why a coach is also beneficial, because they'll ask those questions and get that perspective that maybe they won't have thought of on their own. So I think introspection fundamental, because until you know how to lead yourself and until you know your own blockages and your own beliefs and values, all of that stuff, that huge package.
Yeah.
You can't lead effectively until you really dig deep. So yes, introspection on your own and introspection with someone external. It doesn't have to be a coach. Some people prefer mentors. I find that coaches ask those questions, but sometimes mentors do. It can also be just a really good friend who's a fantastic listener and knows how to ask these really deep questions. It can also be a family. I mean, it can be someone, but ideally it's someone who's not too attached emotionally and can really give you that external feedback, because sometimes you need to say very challenging things, maybe things the other person doesn't want to hear. So the chances are that if it's a friend or family member, they might not be able to say, look, I think you're sabotaging your business right now because you're too, focused on control instead of looking at the bigger picture, or whatever it is that needs to be said. So yes, external perspective, huge to help you dig deeper, I would say.
I like it. It makes a lot of sense. And I think from a clarity standpoint, it's one of the things that probably we all struggle with, because that at the same point, like you were mentioning earlier, the control and overachievers, I don't need anybody. But then when you actually, I guess, experience it, then it's a whole different situation. All right. I want to jump into to reducing overwhelm. I think a lot of people right now are also using the term chaos. So overwhelm and chaos, right? It's I was literally texting with a buddy of mine, a fellow business owner, a few nights ago, and he said that thing. It's just chaos right now. And I've had conversations with different folks in my organization, feeling overwhelmed, feeling chaotic, just kind of where do I can't even see straight to get started. So where does that come from? And kind of you have some, there's a blog post on your website, but kind of that process of how you address the feeling of being overwhelmed.
First of all, there's different types of overwhelm. So it might feel similar, but they might come from different reasons. One type of overwhelm is having too much to do physically in terms of tasks and meetings. Mm-hmm. That's one issue that we can dive into. Another one, it can be emotional overwhelm or overload, which can come from a situation. Someone may be going through a divorce, or someone who's just, even with the current situation, the pandemic, for some people, that's just emotion overload. They can't process it emotionally. Now, what happens is generally these two add up. So you might have a lot of things going on at work, and on top of this, personal circumstances or the pandemic or something worrying. And so it all sort of, and therefore be overwhelmed. Because if you have just one of them, yes.
No, I was going to say, you've got a full plate at work and you're managing that, and then all of a sudden you get into an accident on the way. Now you've got a car situation you've got to deal with, or your HVAC unit goes out at home or whatever, and then that just kind of piles on and really breaks the whole situation.
Exactly. So two ways. So looking at them separately, in terms of tasks and workload, there's a lot of different ways to deal with this. One of them is managing distractions, taking breaks as much as possible, and really working on attention and energy management. Now, people are obsessed about time management, but time management makes no sense if people aren't managing their energy, eating, exercising, sleep. The basics everyone knows, but how often do people do this? And when I talk about exercise, it's not just once quickly, it's first thing in the morning, it's a bit around lunchtime, it's in the evening, 3-4 times a day, and then the break. So we want to look at energy management and attention management, which is, I think, where a lot of people are overwhelmed nowadays because of all these online Zoom meetings all day. People's attention physiologically, biologically cannot cope with this. Now, I understand that some people, they are in job circumstances where there isn't that much leeway and they can't actually control it. Then the minimum is they just have to leave 5 minutes before the end of the meeting and have at least a 5-10 minute gap. They just have to force that. Arrive late, I don't care, but because a lot of these people have back-to-back all day. Yeah. And it's kind of known that they overrun anyway. So in those moments, you have to force, if you want to pay attention in those meetings, that's the only way, a 5-10 minute break outside, fresh air, even if it's raining. Anyway, that's one point, attention and energy. And in terms of tasks, most common thing is people put too much, and therefore they always feel they haven't achieved everything at the end of the day. So it's looking at putting less things, but that are more important, and managing that whole important management. That's for the whole task and meeting side of things. And for the emotional side of things, then it's really working on emotional management, on, maybe if it's something really deep and serious, seeing a therapist to talk it through, expressing it, meditating, spending time outdoors. I mean, really working, because what happens is most people suppress their emotions and ignore them until it becomes a really big problem. What's more healthy is to take them as they go. So notice if during the day something comes up, take a quick break, process it, write about it, come back, instead of suppressing it by checking Instagram. This is what most people do when they feel upset or distraught or anxious or bored or impatient. They'll quickly check social media or read emails instead of saying, I don't feel good this very second. Pause, walk out of your office, breathe, think of something else, fresh air, and come back. It's just a reflex because we get that dopamine kick from the distraction. So that's a long answer, but there's a lot to reducing overwhelm. There's processes, but there's a lot of things to work on.
All right, I want to jump back into the taking breaks thing, because there's two, like, I understand, intelligently I understand the process. In the moment of feeling I've got so much stuff going on, the concept of stopping for a break, taking a day off, going on vacation, doing all those things is so opposite of the feeling and demand that this needs to be fixed right now. I have these 20 things that need to be fixed right now. And so the persistence on those, especially for, I would imagine anybody that you would consider as an overachiever or in that kind of mindset, the taking a break feels like quitting or giving up. How do you battle that? Because that's an opposing feeling of, I've got this stuff to do. Well, you're telling me I need to take a break. That doesn't make sense, and it also sounds like I'm giving up or quitting. So how do I cross that gap to actually get back into creating good progress?
Yes, and this is probably the number one struggle and the number one thing that I sort of insist on with all of my clients, because some of them come to me in overwhelm or almost burnout. That's the most important thing they need to do. Before we can look at business strategy, before we can tap into peak performance, they have to take breaks already to recuperate their level of energy. So I agree with you that it's counterintuitive on the moment. I think that the best way to really learn anything is to implement it. So what I invite people in this situation to do is to start implementing it in as much that they feel they can stand. So if it's just they can't stand taking more than 5-minute break, take 5. We can increase it to 10 later. We can increase it to a proper lunch break. But starting with what feels like, okay, I can do this now, and starting to build that habit of, I do one major task, I take a break. I do one Zoom call, I take 2 minutes, drinking water, coming back, away from screen and away from phone. So 2 minutes, 5 minutes, building it up. And that's where the discipline kicks in, having these boundaries. So deciding ahead of time, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to see yourself as a person who's working weekends instead of spending time with the family? Looking at the bigger picture, what the priorities are, and then thinking, okay, how do I manage this? And relearning habits, re-putting boundaries in place. Yeah, and changing the way people work. Essentially, it's about relearning how to work because people have acquired a lot of toxic habits, such as working nonstop or taking too much on or answering everyone's emails, a lot of these things, and it's changing that, simplifying it so they can have that mental space and they get better results. I have a client who never took breaks at all, not even lunch, and then started taking breaks every hour or so and a long hour lunch break, and now would say she'd never go back.
Yeah. So I want to talk about breaks, because I can also hear a lot of folks in my team going, Katie said we need to take a break. So I want to talk a little bit about that from a structure standpoint. But earlier, before we get into that, you said something earlier about guilt, feeling the guilt of taking breaks or taking time off or whatever. I want to address that, because I'll tell you transparently, that's something that I struggle with, especially in a time of chaos, feeling overwhelmed. For me to come in and say, hey, oh yeah, guys, by the way, I'm going to take the next couple of days off to kind of get my head together. I would struggle immensely doing that because I would feel that I'm walking in and saying to my team, yeah, it's chaos right now, but I need to go take a break. So how do you coach through that process of, I would imagine part of this answer is going to be, well, if you were to structure that earlier, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But how do you go through through the process of saying, battling the guilt of taking breaks on a regular basis to recharge against the guilt of leaving your team without support?
I think it's about finding that compromise. So again, building it up little by little to a period where you can, and you always take, for example, weekends off or always finish at 6. But I can understand that might not be possible immediately. Mm-hmm. There might be things ongoing. There might be other ways of working. So it's thinking of what's the minimum break, time off you can take that would help you to recharge and not feel guilty. Mm-hmm. And then slowly increasing that, because also there is a correlation between the amount of hours we work and the amount of breaks we have and time off and ultimate performance. So I'm not saying that this means zero work and full time off, that's zero performance. But I'm also not saying it's 80 hours work and zero time off. That's medium performance. So there's like that sweet spot. And also it varies. Like it varies from person to person and it varies from week to week. So it's not about being super radical all the time and that's the way you work. Yeah. It's more, again, this is where energy management comes in. Once more, if you go through something personal in your life, you might only be able to work half days for it to be productive, for it to do something. But maybe you're on top of your game, it's summer, you're feeling great, and then suddenly you can do 12 hours a day, but it's not exhausting you. So it's really, again, it's about the energy management and not the time. But to come back to your question about the guilt, it would be finding that compromise within yourself of how much time off you feel you need, and then how much of this can you start doing. And also, like I mentioned earlier, it's about putting small slots even during the day, because if it's really a matter of overwhelm, then even, I read an article the other day, a 10-second break makes a difference. 10 seconds. The 10 seconds, looking away from the screen, breathing, 10 seconds, coming back makes a difference. So everyone has time for that. But I'd say 2-3 minutes regularly, every hour, huge difference. Seriously, I mean, I could talk about breaks all day because it's the most underestimated tool for high performance and productivity. People always feel they need to be busy nonstop. And it's literally the one that probably increases performance and productivity most with exercising.
I like it. Can you copy this key? That's a question we get asked about 3,422 times a year. And how can you actually be sure that the person who asked that question is supposed to get a copy of that key? Well, we think you should always know who can copy your keys to your business and your home, because it could be your neighbor, an old employee, a contractor, or even worse, your mother-in-law. At Loc-Doc Security, we believe in protected key systems, so you always know who has a copy of your key. To find out more, visit locdoc.net or stop by our Charlotte location. Loc-Doc Security, helping you protect your people and your property. One of the things, and I don't know if anybody else has struggled with this, but with the pandemic, and I hate to keep going back to that, but it disrupted life in a lot of different ways. Some in great deal, and some in what I would call first world problems. Before the pandemic, part of my regular annual routine was, going to business conferences and different traveling meetings like that, and so. A lot of those break times for me, if it was once a month, once every 2 months, was the downtime of the travel, airplane. You're not involved in the day-to-day. You get the time to kind of recharge, maybe read a book, whatever. Just kind of break that cycle. That stopped for a majority of us over the past. And so your natural thing is, in crisis mode, you fall into heavy, long work hours, nonstop, and then you find yourself going, okay, hold on a second. How do I'm feeling that burnout. I'm feeling that pressure. I'm feeling that overwhelm. Now I've got to go back, and it almost like it happened, and not every, I would say none of us realized the time that it was going to be. Some of us probably went into it going, it's going to be over. It's going to be figured out in a couple of months. There's very few that I would say thought about it going to be this long term. And so now you're looking in the rearview mirror going, oh, wow, I haven't taken breaks. I haven't had any downtime. I have been going nonstop for that amount of time. So now it's a matter of assessing that. And like you were saying earlier, kind of that self-awareness and the kind of self-reflection to say, okay, now how do I get back on track?
Exactly. It's about readjusting to a new rhythm and a new pattern because it has so radically changed. There might have been breaks or changes that help people, like you said, going to conferences that were quite often and now they're stopped. Another good example is a lot of maybe the meetings were face-to-face in a company, so there wasn't as much screen fatigue, which also counts, or there might have been colleagues popping in here and there, having a brief talk. So there were some minor sort of breaks that happened around the coffee machine or something that people don't have anymore. So it's re-putting these things in place in a different environment.
I was going to ask you, does going to the coffee machine every hour and getting a fresh espresso, is that constitute a break? Because it also just gives me a lot of energy. So I want to talk about the two kind of final things in closing. One, helping your team understand a clear rhythm of breaks. I know for our organization here, we're in a business park, and it's common that people take laps around the business park. So they'll walk outside. It's a 5-10 minute walk. Is that what you're talking about when you're referring to kind of regular breaks, to just kind of you finalize this task and now we're going to go just kind of get some fresh air, exercise our bodies for a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd add without a phone, because a lot of people will either check their messages to friends or listen to podcasts. And the reason I say this is because we want to give ourselves exercise, fresh air, fantastic, but also give our attention a break. And when you are checking, even if it's friends and it's fun, or Instagram or listening to a podcast, even if it feels fun and like a pause, your brain is still having to process more information. So you want to pause the information load. But yes, otherwise, walking around park, perfect, fantastic. Walking around park, no phone, great. Can do a better break, drink water, that's it.
All right.
Not that hard, really.
The other other few things that I wanted to jump in on from this blog, and I would definitely, we'll link this in the description as well, but I would definitely challenge anybody to go check this out. But a couple of things that you talk about on here, from kind of attacking that feeling of overwhelmed and even talking about why some of those things happen, is decision making and unclear processes. Kind of, you want to give a high level overview of kind of what you're talking about there when feeling overwhelmed, how those things come into play?
Yes, absolutely. So it's interesting because I mentioned the tasks and the meetings and the emotions, and I didn't mention this. But yes, decision making we do all the time, all day long, and especially, I was going to say especially for business owners, but maybe that's because I understand business owners more. Maybe it's the same in a corporate setting. And I think, again, it comes back to this time attention management. So it takes a lot of attention and thought to make a decision. So you want to automate that as much as possible. For instance, the type of task you do first thing in the morning, you can decide that the day before, planning your week, doing blocks. I mean, there's loads of methods around this, but you want to reduce decision making. Again, for people putting in breaks at the beginning, that might be another decision. Like they might be, looking at email, or should I go break? But once it becomes a routine, then that's no longer a decision.
Sure.
And then unclear processes. This is just in general, lack of clarity can be a big emotional component and task. This is why I also invite people to have less tasks during the day that are bigger, like 3 main outcomes a day, instead of a bunch of little things everywhere, because that makes everything unclear. So my days literally look like call, break, I do this task. Generally it's write my book for now, then one call, then I do this specific task, then another call, then I have lunch. So it's very linear. And in between all of those blocks, I fit in a 5-minute break. And then sometimes I switch them around to have some, variety. It's not always super fixed. But the idea is that's how a day has to feel like. If it feels like just loads of little things here and there and answering emails and quickly doing this, then doing that, then that's messy in the head. It has to feel quite fully focused on one specific thing. Even if that one specific task is answering emails, then that's all you do for like 1 hour.
Yeah.
But then off, and then 1 hour on this report. So very single tasking, focused is what I'm saying.
So one thing that I would agree with you on the process side as well, I was having a conversation with one of our team members the other day, and the feeling of overwhelm was coming up and kind of bottled frustration. And when we started to unpack it, part of it was there was a section of the work that they were doing that was a kind of a new area. There was no defined processes, and it was so much ambiguity. And for that particular person, they were struggling with maintaining that because of the fact that they even said these other things, it's not a matter of necessarily the workload, it's a matter of these particular projects, so much ambiguity that I feel like I can't make traction because I don't even know where I'm at in the process. So it really kind of said to me that in leadership aspects, you've got to be mindful and attuned to those things to help with that. So you can kind of point that out and say, okay, well, yes, it is an ambiguous process. So how can we start to define it a little better and work together to define it? Because if that is a big hiccup, that's something that can be solved. But if we don't realize it, then you're now adding undue feeling of overwhelm just because somebody hasn't taken the time to define a process.
Exactly. And I think in those cases, it's a typical case of trying to take actions before reflection. So we're all wired, or a lot of us are wired to be proactive, do lots of stuff, be busy, be very action. And that's why I say introspection is so important. Pauses are so important, or breaks or time off, but also reflecting. So reflecting at the end of the week, how was your week? Reflecting at the beginning of the week, what you want to achieve this week. But reflecting, if you have an unclear process, this is uncomfortable. For most people and organizations, if something is unclear, something's a bit off and it's not a comfortable feeling. So they dilute it with action. Action soothes us. It gives us that dopamine. It makes us feel good. And it makes us feel like we're progressing. When in fact, the best thing might be, okay, everyone take 2 hours off, all go in a room, no phones, no computer, take a notebook, piece of paper, reflect on the process. After these 2 hours, we'll all come together and let us discuss the brainstorm, and let's come together with the clear process.
So reflection, effectively creating a habit of reflection before action will help to clarify and reduce overwhelm. Look at this.
Wonderful. Yes, you summarized the whole podcast. There we go. Exactly. A habit of reflection. I love it.
Somebody print that on a sign and put it in the building.
This is so important. And this is one of the things I'm most passionate about. And maybe I haven't used these exact terms, but it's working and living intentionally.
Ooh.
This is why I'm big about the boundaries, because you set the intention. I'm big about reflection, planning your week, reviewing your week, because it helps you to fine tune and be more intentional. So what you're saying here is key, because if you reflect, so much easier to be intentional.
Very good. Thank you very much, Katie. You have brought a lot of clarity today. These are things that we can unpack in our organization, and we'll definitely be sharing a lot of this, and hopefully other folks that are watching or listening to this will be able to take action on as well. If they want to get in contact with you, want to connect with you further, what is the best way to do that?
The best way is LinkedIn, so Katie Stoddart on LinkedIn, or they can write me a message on the Focus Beat. There's a contact form. They can write to me there.
All right, very cool. And we're excited. So what is your target for your book to be ready?
This year. I don't have a month yet, but this year, yeah.
Very cool. Well, let us know when that's ready. We'll come back and chat about it, because that sounds like it'll be lots of fun. Katie, thank you very much for joining us. And man, it was an impactful conversation. Got some great takeaways. Create a habit of reflection before action. I think that's a big takeaway for today. And I think it's something that we should all take a step back and look at as we are getting prepared to go into this week. Thank you very much for joining us today. If this is your first time, we definitely invite you to subscribe. Share this episode with somebody that you think may be gain some benefit from it. To make sure you do that and make sure you're subscribed. You can find out more about that at Loc-Doc.net/podcast. All the links to all the podcast platforms are there. And this is also available in video form on Facebook and YouTube. So be sure to check that out. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.